So, our main topic this week here on Mastering Dungeons is going to continue along the same lines as we've been going the last few weeks. We're going to talk today about keeping your new campaign healthy and strong. So, we've talked about world building, we've talked about creating starting locations, starting adventures for your new campaign. Then we talked about creating or leveraging player-facing rules that will intrigue them and ground them in your new world and your new campaign. I wanted to keep on the same path, but change tack just a little bit to talk about how to keep a campaign going once you get it started. Uh, I will never forget when Wizards of the Coast released this information a while back about how many sessions an average campaign lasted. And it was between 3 and 5.
Yeah.
Which shows that so many campaigns get off to a good start. They get a little momentum for those first 3 or 4 sessions, and then something happens and they crash. If you have been playing for years, you may have experienced this. I know that I have, both as a player and as a game master, when it just all falls apart for so many
Yeah.
reasons.
Yeah.
Uh, but there are steps you can take to try to fend off some of the things that might happen that will derail a campaign. So let's talk now about how you can maintain a healthier long-term campaign. I just made up a list, like one top 10, but we may add some as we go.
Yeah.
And we may decide that some of them don't even matter because Teos and I are going to bring our own thoughts
Yep. Yeah.
to this process. So the first thing I want to talk about is choosing the right players for your campaign. You may be in a position where you only have 4 players or 5 players, and that's it. You can't really choose who's going to play because these are your buddies or this is your lunch group at work, and that's just how it is. So you might not be able to choose. But
Yeah.
if you do have a choice of players for a campaign, it's important to ask the question, who is really willing to commit to this? Uh, it's a commitment, right? It
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
a thing.
Yeah.
So
Both
you want to know,
physically, right? Showing up
right?
and that they're gonna be part of the coolness of the campaign, that the campaign will be great because they're in it, right? They're not going to be there on their phones distracted or derailing it or, you know, hurting the rest of the party, or, you know, they're not going to find their fun. And so they're going to commit to the play of it, right? Yeah.
Mhm. Yep. Uh, so you could ask yourself if you have more than just a group, just a 4 or 5 player group, what in this campaign will be of specific interest to these particular players? What interests them? And will those interests be served over the length of this campaign? Is there going to be a shift somehow, either in what you're running or their interests? And how can you keep the campaign in front of their interests? Also, how do the players mesh with each other?
Yeah.
Do you have different player types who, during certain campaigns, may get along very well together, but during a different campaign, might be uh, there might be conflict between them, not necessarily in terms of anger or drama, but just in terms of their interest.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, taking a step back to that whole player, uh, starting with thinking of your players that you have is really valuable. And
Mhm.
in general, in almost all situations, there are players out there who could join you.
Yep.
Um, Unless, like you're saying, it's our lunch group, or the whole point is because these are my friends and I want to spend time with them. That is totally valid, right? Then, well,
Sure.
it's not. I'm not going to bring someone else in. I'm going to deal with I'm going to create a campaign for them because this is my group and I want to be with this group, or I'm physically locked in at lunch at my company and these are the people. But otherwise, I would say it's amazing how different players can change your play. And so it's worth thinking, if you have that flexibility, don't be afraid to try new players from time to time. And one of the things you can do is run a short experience of something else that is more in tune with what you'd like to be running. See how those players go and then adjust, right? And their time, and it's hard to say no to players, but so it's easier when it's a short thing. You run the short thing, you see how it goes, you see whether the new players work, whether the old players are working, and then you can launch the real thing. Um,
Mhm.
but I've had it has been good for me because like I want to get together with my friends, but I also really want to be running certain types of campaigns. And so tweaking over time who is in my campaigns and adjusting who I bring in, right, out of the possible players, who is part of that group makes it all more fun for all of us.
Mhm. For sure. Then the second step is once you have chosen the right players that are going to fit this campaign, double check and make sure that it is the right campaign for these players. If you think that this high espionage, very role play heavy investigation and intricate plots that have to be unraveled, if you think that's perfect, but then you realize later that one of your players, oh yeah, the last time we tried to do something like that, they were fine for the first adventure, but as soon as we tried to do it the next adventure, they were asking for more combat. Then you might have to do some tweaking to keep that player involved by changing up the beats of the campaign to space out that intricate role playing or uh, very cerebral figuring things out with constant battles or one battle after another for at least a portion of the session.
Yeah, absolutely. Things like the whether the players are optimizers or the degree of optimization they enjoy, the degree of role playing. Like maybe you have players who, boy, they want to turn everything into a theatrical performance, and you want to focus on tactics as a GM, right? We often say opposite, but that's a perfectly fine way for you to want to run a game. So then you may want to choose the players accordingly or modify the campaign accordingly, right? If you've got people who really want theatrical stuff and you really want to play with these folks, then having something that's just dungeon destruction is probably not going to work for that group as well. And you want to pick the adventure accordingly.
Mhm. Then we talk about session zeros a lot. We've had full shows on session zeros. So I just wanted to mention session zero again by saying you should undertake an honest and right-sized session zero. Session zeros are important for a lot of reasons. So you want to take the time to discuss key points. You want to take the time to discuss preferences and triggers and all of those things. If you are already very familiar with the players, though, you can sort of shortcut some of these things
Mm-hmm.
and get to the key points that are important for this particular campaign. So you don't want to suck all the oxygen out of the campaign in your session zero. If creating characters and discussing it is going to take 5 hours, so you divide up your session zero into two and a half hour sessions, you're already on to session three by the time the campaign starts. And the excitement for it may have been lost.
Yeah.
So make sure your session zero is complete, but also make sure it's right sized. Do just enough to get all the important things out. This is what the campaign's going to be. This is how long it's going to be. This is the characters we're going to be playing. Let the rest of it happen
Yeah.
either off off nights or just get into the game.
Yeah, and for session zeros, I like to do a fair bit of that sort of establishing of what the campaign should be like,
Mhm.
both as a kind of check on my end to make sure that that we do have what I think we have player wise, interest wise, but also to communicate where we're headed, right? So the
Mhm.
expectation is really clear. And so and but I don't want to have like you talked about that lack of energy. So I often do a survey beforehand.
Mhm.
just using Google Forms or SurveyMonkey or anything like that. Just send out a survey with some questions, and you don't want a million questions, but you may want to ask things that you think you already know the answer to, like how challenging do you want this to be, or how much do you want everybody to be optimizing, or things like that, right? Like how important is the character builds to you? Just various types of questions. It could also be campaign questions, like are you interested? Which of the things interest you the most? Pirates, undead, traps, tomb exploration, whatever. Like those are some things I did for Tomb of Annihilation, and it can be really helpful to just go like, a fair number of people really like pirates. Okay, I'm going to expand that part of the adventure, right? Or if nobody likes intrigue, role playing with the nobility, then well, I guess downplaying that makes sense. And some of the results, can shock you, like, and you can find that there might be big divergence. So you might be, this is the group I'm going to run, but I have to acknowledge that some of them like a very challenging game and some of them do not. And so I'm going to have to speak to both as I run. Those kinds of things are really useful. And then by having that survey, then now you've actually made it easier for everybody to create characters at the session zero if you want to do character creation at your session zero, because we've got those sort of establishing factors. So like I just ran we had a Blade Runner combination character generation and start the second adventure. We played the first one, which was great because that was almost like a prequel, but one of the players said, I really want to create new characters for this. And everybody was like, yeah, okay, sure. And so we showed up and made the characters, but we had that pre-established first adventure down, which made it much easier to think through what kind of roles and choices everybody wanted to do. And there's clear expectations about the type of play. So that made it a lot easier, right? Served as a session, a pre-session zero in a way.
Right. Yeah. I played Daggerheart last week, and I'm going to play again this week. And we did character creation in an hour, thanks to Demi Plane's wonderful implementation of that. And so character creation went pretty quickly. And we really even discussed rules a bit as we were creating the characters. And then we got to play for 2 hours. And the game master is really good. The players are really good and used to games other than D&D. So all of that was sort of known, and we knew that about each other, which made it go really smoothly. And we didn't have to spend too much extra time talking about the characters or talking about the rules. We knew enough to know when we could just start. And it was very handy.
Yeah, and one other thing, when you're doing this kind of character generation and kind of establishing, the whole point of this, really going back, is we're doing this to create a better campaign, and so it doesn't fall apart, because campaigns fall apart for so many reasons, including lack of energy, miscommunications, different play styles, and all of that. So the more that we're setting things up on a common ground, the better off we're going to be. And you can, as you get more experience with this kind of session zero and running campaigns, you can think through what you like to be part of that setup, right? Like, do you like to have links between all the characters? Do you want to introduce them to each other through play? Do you want to have them tied into organizations in the game? You can think through all these things that might strengthen the relationship, but also complicate it. And based on your ability to navigate that, your previous experiences, your players' experiences, you could think through how carefully you want to do that. So, for example, for Blade Runner, I, both out of my time, and one thing that's nice about Blade Runner is I know that I'm not running this campaign for eons. So I don't have to invest in it super fully, right? I don't have to do the work I would do if I'm going to run this for years. So I can say, let's just, character generation is going to be character generation, and I will do steps later to add to it. So when they came up with things like key memories, I might have provided some minor nudges based on what I know the campaign's about, but largely let them just do it, right? But now I will go back and I will reinforce some things to add that layer that I want out of a campaign, where the campaign is more based on the characters, right? So I'm going to do that afterwards. But in a lot of ways, if this were a larger campaign, I would do it beforehand to set things up and say, here are themes, because I want you to be part of that fabric of where we're going to go in the campaign.
Yeah. So at the session zero, I strongly suggest the next step, which is find a schedule that will work for everyone. Often we will say, hey, is everybody free Saturday night at 6? We're going to play. We'll do our session 0. And then everyone makes it to that session. And then you say, okay, when do we play next? And everyone's like, well, we'll figure it out. We'll get to, and you leave. And that's the last time you're all able to meet. That's happened to me more than once. So at that session 0, try if you can to find a schedule that works. If you can get everyone, it may take you a half an hour,
Yeah.
but if everyone will sit down and look at their schedule and say, oh, nope, I can't do it then. If you can say, how about we play, even if it's just the next session, can everyone play next Wednesday because it's a holiday at 1 p.m.
Yeah.
because no one's working? Does that work? Right. Get that session locked in. And if you can, make up a regular schedule every 2 weeks,
Yeah.
Saturday nights at 7. If you can at least get a verbal commitment, that takes a lot of onus off you then having to try to do it remotely, get everyone on the same page when you might not be able to get someone's attention for 3 days because they're not answering their email. While they're there, take care of that.
Yeah. And that whole, you put a word in the show notes here, be flexible, regular, but flexible. I really love that because sometimes you do have to change away from what you'd like.
Mhm.
While at the same point, somebody must make decisions and push for something, right? So a lot of times when I ask
Mhm.
groups like, what day can we play? Oh boy, you get all these answers and all these. So what I often will do is I'll say, hey, I'm available, Wednesdays, Fridays, whatever's, right? Here are
Mhm.
3 days. How does that work for everybody? And polls can help with this too. So this is also something you can
Yep.
precede by having this in a poll. And so you'll see, okay, here's what works for folks. And often it doesn't work, right? This is one of the maddening things, though, the older that people are, which is one of the reasons I often invite a larger pool initially
Mhm.
to be possibly in the campaign. And so, what I find is, well, we have, 4 players out of 6. Well, we'll do that, right? We'll run with the 4. But now it means we really have to make that work with the 4 that we have who can play regularly. And I may say, hey, someone else, if you are able to make a session, I'll find a role for you, or I may not, depending on the type of campaign I'm doing.
Mhm.
But what I will often do, I like a weekly campaign because it becomes part of my schedule of what I do. I prepare on this day, I run on this day, and I like that cadence. The every other week is a little hard on me. But in this case, for the Blade Runner campaign, we had folks who said, someone said, every other week would actually work better. And then someone immediately chimed in and said, yeah, me too. And I said, this is great. That's fine. Well, let's do this. Right.
Yeah. And the flexible part goes into this next thing, which is set an end date. And you may immediately say, but I don't want to set an end date for this campaign. I want it to be an ongoing campaign. That's okay. Set the end date because you're much more likely to get buy-in
Mm,
and you're much more likely to keep people's interests if there is a finish line. People will come back when they say, oh, there's only 3 more sessions. Oh, there's only 2 more sessions. Even if they love what's going on, they'll come. But even
yeah.
if they're like, "Ooh, this is getting a little bit much for me," that end date will spur some people on just a bit more to get them there. And then you can always go further, which we will talk about later in this list.
Yeah, the end date. I've been surprised how effective that has been in my campaigns. Like I ran a Numenera campaign based on the Wanla series of novels by Tony DiTerlizzi, and I just had this idea, and I wanted kind of to get to know the cipher system, and so I just said, hey, this is going to be 4 sessions. But I want to do that. And I was taking 3 novels and concluding them in 4 sessions, which I wasn't even sure I could pull off. But I was like, worst case, I'll run a 5th session. But I managed to do it, by keeping the action going, keeping us focused, and weaving through the most important of what happens in those novels. And we had a really great time, and we all got to learn the system a bit and get a feel for it. And that was really high engagement, high interest. And in some ways, that can be better. The only caveat to that is if you do only short experiences, you may at some point lose people who don't get the investment out of it. So you may want to alter that, right? A little longer campaign, a shorter campaign.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
But having that vision, right? Even like if you're running like something like this Vecna mega adventure we were talking about in the first part of the show, you could still say, my thought is this is going to run through whatever, November.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And now everybody knows, right? And then maybe partway through you go, so folks, this is feeling a little more like, right? I ran Tomb of Annihilation and it was going forever. And then players wanted to be like, will we get to be higher than 10th level? Can we keep doing this? And I said, no.
Mm-hmm.
I'm ending this. I'm at peak energy. I'm loving this. This is super fun. And then my energy is going to drop for this campaign. So we're just going to stop it, like at the sweet spot, because it'll get worse.
Yeah. Yep. When you do start the campaign strong, and we've already covered this, but I wanted to add it again. So go back and listen to like creating the first adventure, because it's important to capture that energy and maintain that energy through the first encounter, through the first adventure, through the first session, and build on that energy rather than depleting that energy.
Yeah, absolutely.
My seventh one is find a way to engage between sessions, in parentheses, without overwhelming the players. So if you say we're going to play every other week, and people agree and they say every Saturday night, great, here we go, then you go off and then things start to pile up. Even if it's every week, things start to pile up. The kids have, their recital. Oh, meeting with a business. Oh, family coming to visit. And it becomes much easier to lose focus because you're not at the table. So find a way to engage. Teos talked about sending out a poll.
Mm-hmm.
That could be it. It could be, hey, how did you like these things from last session? Yes, no. What do you want to do in the next session? Answer here. If you have a player who is a writer, say, hey, could you write up a 200-word summary of what your character saw? Hey, artist, could you draw me a picture of this NPC that you met? Hey, computer science person, could you build me this thing that will help me keep track of your reputation of your party? These are the variables I need. If you can do that and keep them interested outside of the game in whatever way, they will be more likely to come back to the table to play the game.
Yeah, it's a good point. Like when I was running Tomb of Annihilation, one player, and I didn't prompt this, but I should have prompted these kinds of things. But one player made a version of the map of Chult that you could scratch off, right? So they had found somewhere they read about a paint that you can use to cover paper and essentially turned into a scratch off thing. So we could do hex exploration by scratching and revealing what was there, which was really cool. And another made puzzle cubes that they had made for a run of their epic that we wrote, or the open. And they had those. So they were like, hey, you can use these however you want. So at times I would think of how to use those puzzle cubes because I had these physical props. And it is really true that it gets players excited. And I like to do a couple things around this angle of keeping players invested over time. And I come back to why, right? The why of it is the staying engaged so that we keep having a successful, fun campaign, and that we are all aware of what we want it to be, right? Being on the same page around it, engagement and common understanding, communication. And so to do that, it's a combination of making sure everybody has the right information and that it continues to be interesting and playing off of what they want out of it, right? So things like I try to really understand what each character is about. and what the player wants for that character. It does not a, and I don't mean, +2 magic item, and I don't mean become king of the realm necessarily, though some of that a little more. But that idea of I'm looking at a broader level. I am a leader seeking to lead people.
Mhm.
They may want to be king and they may want a +2 sword, but it's
Right.
that they are looking for those kinds of leadership opportunities. And when you generalize like that, then you get a lot of opportunities to surprise and please and enable things, right? Um, and give them choices that are hard choices. Do if you do this, you lead the group, but if you don't, you've stuck to your guns and maybe gone with the moral choice. What do you decide? And that's fun either way. Um, and areas of the character that they want to explore, questions they have, mysteries they particularly want to resolve in the campaign can push them towards that level of expertise and engagement, right? If you really care about the history of that cult, of Vecna or whatever, then help that player become the person who's always unraveling these mysteries and the person who's, maybe creates a library or partners with one or becomes the head of the library and, all that kind of stuff. That kind of interplay, and that is the best. And you don't, I think a lot of times as DMs, we think we have to be an expert at it, but we don't. Just get your feet wet a little, play around with it, and adjust as you go.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And it sort of leads into 8 for me, which is leave room for changes without
Mm.
breaking the session 0 contract. So as Teos said, based on what your players do, you may need to change, uh, or you may need to change to make yourself happy and take the campaign in the direction you like. But always go back to that session 0 contract that you made and make sure that you are fulfilling what you
Mhm.
promised and what the players wanted. Uh, so I think that's pretty self-explanatory. And that actually goes to 9 too, which is have frequent check-ins. Check in with individual players and check in with the group as a whole. Some people may feel more comfortable saying something that possibly negative or constructive feedback individually. They don't want to do it in front of everyone. And some people are more likely to do it if they have the backing of the players that are there to say, I think we feel this,
Yeah.
and they don't want to tell you in person. So do it both ways,
Yeah.
to see if you're hitting all the marks, making everyone happy. Because if everyone's happy, then everyone's going to keep coming back Saturday night to
Yeah.
keep playing your game.
Yeah, and that check-in is good. You can look at if you did a poll up front, whether it was in person or digitally, you can look back at those questions you asked and say, well, I want to go check in and say, check in with everybody. Hey, do you want more of these themes or did we kind of cross them off the list, right? Do you want more pirates? Do you want more Tombs of Traps? Do you want more, whatever? Is the challenge level okay for you, right? Because some of those people who said, I want low challenge may now be actually, I'd like a little more, or they might
Mhm,
say no, it's great, or they might say this is still too hard and I
mhm.
feel like my character is always in peril. So
Yep.
you get to reevaluate those things, and also it means the players know that you're listening.
Yep.
You can't they will hopefully understand you can't please everybody exactly to the where they would set their dial, but you
Mhm.
can please them enough
Yep.
and that they know that you're trying, right? You're trying to make it work for everybody, and that's all anybody can hope for.
Yep. Number 10, I had written end the campaign at the designated time with a climactic scene or a climactic adventure. And I want to even add to that, which is end the campaign at the designated time or when you know it's time.
Yeah.
So it could be before the designated time that, all right, you know what? This is played out. There is more we could do, but I think this is a good stopping point. Or if you did say this is going to be a 10 session game campaign, we're at session 10. So here's the big scene against the boss, and you've been tracking the boss's cohorts and minions and plots, and there you just succeeded at the top of the volcano. Hey, great. Then but you can, if you want to continue this, you can leave a path forward.
Mhm.
You could say, you've defeated this enemy. There was a note on the enemy that speaks to a larger conspiracy.
Right.
We can end here if anyone or everyone wants to, or we can continue for another 10 session arc that follows this that will take us from level, 10 to 15.
Yeah.
What do people think? And then you're back to the session zero, right? You're
Yeah.
discussing how you want to continue, if you want to continue. Uh, so that's my 10.
Yeah, so 10 is really interesting, right? The idea of the campaign end, I think we could probably have it may be worth our having a show on that as a
Hmm.
topic in this series, because I think the campaign end has a number of things. First, there's the lead up to the
Hmm.
campaign end, where when you can see that end coming, either because you preordained it, it's going to be 6 sessions, or November is coming, or whatever, however it is that you communicated that end, and you're starting to get there. That is a time where you start pruning the paths and the story arcs and the options. The mysteries have to start getting solved, right? You can't have all those red herrings out there anymore.
Hmm.
And so you want to start kind of trimming that stuff, and you look at the player goals and to get accomplished, or how do we do that, right? And if it goes unfulfilled, can we point towards that having been something that happens post campaign or something, right? And and that takes some time. That is a lot of DM craft work to in those sessions when you see X sessions remaining, and I need to accomplish those things, right? But that's an important part, to go through that and check those boxes and think through what your plan is, how you're going to get there. Then the actual ending itself, I generally love just a big, exciting fight, right? And it was funny to look back recently. I was thinking on D&D 5e campaigns and how many of them I think struggle, and not without cause, for the balance between the big boss fight and then what happens after that, if anything, and how to handle that.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, Rime of the Frost Maiden's hilarious. You kind of have the big boss fight in the middle
Yeah.
and end the threat, and then there's all this other stuff. Tomb of Annihilation has the, like, you fight the end boss, but then there's a couple more rooms, and they
Yeah.
kind of explain some stuff, but it's not really important, and nobody cares. They're exhausted by this fight, but like, what am I going to have a session for 2 more rooms? Otherwise, I have to tack it on the end of this big climactic. We're all just exhausted, kind of thing. It's really weird design, right? Um, and and so I think that's it. I don't. Do you want to talk about boss fights or end fights or things like that? You have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I would rather wait and
Okay. Okay.
let's do a
Yeah.
wrapping up your
That sounds
campaign
good. That sounds good.
show,
Yeah.
because I think
Yeah.
we're
I think we've got a lot there we could use. So.
yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
Uh, so anything else you want to add to this list before we move
Well,
on?
I think one other thing is, how do you record what happened?
Hmm.
And there's some really nice write ups in the old Chris Perkins DM series that you can find a PDF out there that gathers all of it. Um, but uh, I think there's your session notes. What do you want to record for each session, or is a player recording it? Sometimes a player can do that. How do you do recaps at
Hmm.
sessions so that players can recall what happened? And do you have the players do that? Do you announce previously on? Do you mail out, like, I like a 1-page Word document? I bold all the NPC and place names, so all the kind of proper
Hmm.
nouns get bolded. If there's something super critical, I might underline it or italicize it, but generally not. And I just try to quickly, on 1 page, force myself to 1 page, and I'm a long-winded person, as everybody knows. So that's a feat. 1 page, here's what happened, and send that out. And when I'm doing long campaigns, that becomes my Bible, and I put it in a binder physically so that I can look at it and keep those things going. And I work off of those, because that's our common understanding between players and myself of what happened, right? And I like to find some mechanism for that, for carrying those things forward, and whether you share them at the beginning of sessions or not. I'm not so big on the previously on kind of thing, but many people are and believe in it, and so it's great to
Yeah.
just find your method
Yeah.
there.
No, that's a great thing that you could slide in under 7. Find your way to engage between sessions
Yeah,
is
yeah,
lead a discussion about what happened in character, out of character, via
yeah,
Slack or Discord or
yeah,
whatever you use to communicate.
yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, with that, we are going to say goodbye to this episode, and we're going to say thank you to all of our listeners. We're going to give an extra special thank you to those patrons who support us, whether they are a Master of Dungeons supporter, a Master of the Realm supporter who get a shout out in our show notes, or a Master of the Multiverse. Those patrons, we hear from them right now. Dave Bastianson, Chris Webster, Javier Waziak, Graham Ward, James Walton, Joe Tyler, Thrace, Krishna Simone Say, Andy Shockney, Ross Sandberg, Chance Russo at Drago Russo, Vladimir Prunner from Croatia, Robert Pasley, Post Fiction RPG Audio, Mighty Zeus, Mike Olson, Tom Nelson, creator of the player or the deck of player safety, not the player of deck safety. That's a whole other thing. Falcon Neal, Sean Molly, John Mickey, Eric Mengi, the Mathemagician, Chad Lench, Jim Klingler, aka DM Prime Mover, Brian King, Chad Jackson, Sean Hurst, Ben Heisler, and Paige Lightman. The Mighty Jerd, thank you for the Black Ballad. Oh, Nathan Fuller, Andy Edmonds at nerdronomicon.com, Evil John, Merrick Blackman, Steve Bissonette, Craig Bailey, Lou Anders of Lazy Wolf Studios, and Keith Ammon of The Monsters Know What They're Doing. Thank you so much. You can support the show by going to patreon.com/masteringdnd. You can also help us by leaving us a review on Apple Podcast or subscribe and like via YouTube. We're at youtube.com/@masteringdungeons. So Teos, where can people find you?
Ooh, find me at alphastream.org. And I just started a kind of blog series paralleling what we're talking about. So the first one is talking about my first step I do for campaigns, where I actually, when I'm running the old one, I start a list of what I want next. So I intend to kind of just add little bits of my own kind of personal thoughts on campaigns, because I often have so many thoughts that we can't put them all in a show. So thought I would start a blog series on that. So find it at alphastream.org. Shawn, where do we find you?
You can find me not writing things like that everywhere on social media at Shawn Merwin, and you can follow the podcast on social media at Mastering D&D. You can also, of course, go to that YouTube channel, Mastering Dungeons. So we have figured out how we are going to keep people coming back to our campaign. What are we going to do now?
I mean, if we chain them in our basement, they can't leave, and we just play all the time.
Then it really is Dungeons and Dragons.